In a flashback of sorts to last spring's massive public sector strikes, the largest federal public sector unions, are at odds with the government again over remote work policies. Currently, most hybrid workers are only required to work in their offices twice a week, but the feds want to boost that to 3 days a week. The result? The unions have gone to bat against the feds, promising a, quote, summer of discontent over the move. How does this one end up playing out? Let's bring in the front bench to talk about that. Saeed Selvam is the Vice President and Practice Lead of Public Affairs at National Public Relations. Shakir Chambers worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. He's now a principal at Earnscliffe Strategies. Former interim NDP National Director Karl Bélanger is with us. Next to him, he's now the president, I should say, of Traction Strategies. And next to him, Marieke Walsh is a senior political reporter with the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Shakir, I'll start with you. My sense is that the federal government feels public opinion will likely be on their side. But I think the unions feel like they were genuinely blindsided by this, and they didn't think because of that agreement and conversations they had with the government that that would be the case. Do you think they have sort of the possibility of some success with this pushback to what the feds are doing?
I think this is going to be a losing battle for the unions based on what you said. Public opinion is probably going to support the Liberals, right? You mentioned it in your interview. I mean, there's a lot of Canadians out there that, you know, maybe unwillingly didn't want to go back to the office 2 or 3 days a week, but they have to. So for public sector workers to say, we don't want to do this, it looks very unreasonable. And I do think there's a view out there of some of these public sector workers of, you know, being well paid, compensated pretty well, having pensions, you know, day-to-day workload, it is what it is. And I just think a lot of folks will look at this and be like, why do you want to be treated differently than everybody else out there? And I think if Chris Allwork is true in his words and saying the NDP is the only party that supports these unions, I think it might be in their best interest to lock in 3 days at the most, because other parties might not be as nice or generous on those days.
It'll be interesting, Karl, to see, I guess, how it ends up unfolding, because I feel like it's not necessarily a fair fight. I get how the public sentiment would be totally behind the government in this case if, in fact, the unions did have real offices to go back to and all their colleagues were there. But the system is kind of crazy. Like, you're essentially just doing remote work in a building.
You must go back to the office to go on Teams. That's what's happening. That's the reality of these workers, and it's the sad truth. So I've yet to hear an actual explanation about why the federal government wants to do this. They don't address productivity. In fact, the last time they went up to 2 days a week, Mona Fortier could not explain anything related to productivity, especially after having these workers at home during the pandemic and claiming that they were as productive as ever. So what has changed? And you know, how does this help to fight climate change? If you bring people in traffic, you know, an hour a day, 2 hours a day in some cases, it doesn't help that to achieve our climate target. So what are they trying to achieve? If it is to please the local business, is that the role of an employer to do that? I'm not sure. So, you know, I'm all for a rationale here, but I don't see one, except you know, political reasons to do it.
I mean, that's sort of what the guessing game is right now, Marieke, because they implied in their original letter that there would be, you know, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially you can be more productive and there's benefits, is the word they used, in seeing your colleagues and working alongside them. Like Karl pointed out, that's not necessarily the case. At the same time, they're denying that there's any political motivation, that this is to make the downtown core any better. I think even if it were, and they were upfront about it, I don't know if the public would be necessarily against that if they were just transparent.
Well, I think the public is, as Shakir said, not against this to begin with. Lots of companies, lots of organizations in the private sector are back in the office with different mandates, and they also are still on Teams. They also do what's called hoteling with their desks, especially for people who aren't in every day. Yes, obviously it needs to be arranged and organized in a way that makes sense and is rational, but it only takes effect in September. So there's a long runway for the government to get this right. If they get it wrong, I think that adds to the union's arguments, but I don't think one of the arguments is climate change means everybody should stay at home.
No, but the unions are saying that they're raising that as something to fight back with, but that's in the negotiations as well. Like, I think that's part of what the back and forth is at this point.
Yeah, I just don't think Karl's argument of climate change and emissions from commuting is something that's going to rule the day on whether people should be in the office or not.
It's about showing leadership, though, right? Like, you say that you should reduce emissions. One way that emission is up in this country is by putting more cars on the road.
Sure, but Karl, they can just jump on the transit system here in Ottawa, which works day in and day out. Just
listen, absolutely.
Saeed, let me get your take on this. What do you think about the way this might go down?
Well, look, when it comes to the Liberals right now, this is not necessarily an issue that you'd want to be picking a fight on. It's such a trivial issue. So when it comes to people working remotely, whether it's certain departments, whether it's certain agencies, it's interesting that the Liberals are pushing back so hard on this right now. Now, technically, they have every right to do it. If it wasn't part of the original agreement or the bargaining contract, they have every single right where they can actually, put their foot down and say, come back into the office. But justifying it in terms of productivity alone, I don't think is going to be enough. And when it comes to the union side of things, of course, at the end of the day, working from home is a privilege. It's not necessarily a right, but at the end of the day, it's something that people have gotten so used to, and they've been able to generate some productivity from home. So unless there has been a huge drop in productivity across the board or across ministries, it's going to be hard to justify it from the government's side of things to basically say, well, this is the reason why we need you in. But at the end of the day, they have the right to do it, and they're clearly exercising that right. It's just not something you want to see a strike over, especially if you're in the government's position right now. It's not good news, and it's not a battle that you should be picking right now, especially with public service employees.
Well, I found it kind of curious, Shakir, the degree to which the Liberals were not talking about this. Today was the first day since last week, the letter was sent essentially to all the unions, that Minister Anand even said anything. And you heard what she said. It wasn't exactly, she declined our invitation for an interview. She hasn't done interviews on this. She just stopped on her way into, I think it was question period or caucus this morning to offer some comments. And as I was thinking about it, I thought, why not? Like, they might have a justifiable position. I think you're right that public opinion would kind of lean their way. But maybe it's because of the risk it poses for what is potentially a significant constituency of people. You heard Chris Aylward, as you mentioned, say very clearly, like, NDP has our back. The NDP always has our back. Maybe the Liberals don't want to throw anything in the wound, any salt in the wound right now if those voters end up being important to them down the road.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, they have enough issues to kind of deal with right now as well, right? They don't need to open up another kind of public front, if you will. I would say I know public opinion is on their side right now, but if the unions do go on strike and there's, hold Canadians hostage, there's long lines at public services, ultimately the Liberals will wear that. I think the Canadians are going to be looking to the government to kind of solve issues. And should this drag out over the summer and you can't get things done, your passport takes even longer to kind of secure, I think that'll become a big issue for the Liberals. And again, opening up this front, given the array of issues that they have, given their polling numbers, might not be the wisest move of this time. But to what Marieke said, if the union's position is that climate change is the issue, we don't want to deal with that, again, that's a very weak argument. Not sure the public's going to be buying that moving forward.
Do you think that, Karl, this is a winning issue for the NDP? I mean, they wrote this letter to the NDP. They said, do what you can to pressure the Liberals. I thought, that would mean, hey, threaten your support, but Chris Aylward would not go that far. Essentially said, we're not saying that, just use the levers available.
Well, it's not a winning issue. I think the public opinion, most Canadians go back to work, like in the healthcare sector, in the industrial sector, manufacturing sector. Like, most people have to go back to work. But the unions that represent these workers are saying, we've been doing the work, and what's the problem? Tell us why we need to go back. Oh, to meet in person? They don't. They're spread sometimes on different floors, sometimes in different buildings. So what's the point of going to work? Just give an explanation, and then maybe workers will not have these summer of discontent. But at this point, I don't hear anything.
It's my new slogan. I'm just going to say it to my husband all night. Get ready for the summer of discontent, Frank. Do you think, Marieke, that the Liberals will be more vocal on this? Shakir?
I actually think it's interesting that none of the parties seems to really keen to weigh in. The Conservatives also are weighing into the fight. Because they probably don't want to upset those union people that they're trying to win over.
Well, everyone's trying
to
represent the working class now. That's like the thing to say politically. So you can't really look like you're against the working class.
Yeah.
Not sure that everyone believes public service workers are among those, but I don't know anyone wants to
look,
be anti-union.
I don't think that anybody wants to really be picking a clear fight. At the same time, I don't think it's correct that there are no productivity concerns with the federal public service. It has grown immensely under the federal government. And there
but
are
they don't talk about it.
They don't talk about it. No.
And if that's their justification,
not,
it is incumbent on them to say that.
Absolutely. I mean, we've done some reporting in the Globe that shows just how much has grown by, and there's lots of questions around the value of services, the delivery of services, and there's actually lots of upset. The OECD has done a study or a survey that shows Canadians are among the most unhappy with the public services they receive. So there are questions about how our civil services functioning. It's not just for unions to answer to, it's for governments to answer to as well. But maybe this is part of that rationale.
Yeah, I mean, if the government thinks moving the public service to 3 days in office will impact and address those issues, then I just think it's easy to say it. I am very curious as Saeed as to why they don't.
Yeah, and again, they're probably exercising their right, and they feel that this is the easiest solution to a complicated problem. At the end of the day, when it comes to productivity, they would have to run studies. They'd have to show some sort of research that shows that people are more productive in office. And again, there are studies and research out there in terms of justifying that, but there's also studies and research that proves the opposite point. So it just depends on the company. It depends on the organization. In the case of the government here, they're clearly exercising their right to ask employees to work more than 2-3 days in the office. So we'll see where this goes. But this is not a fight that they should be picking at this point in time. It's a super trivial issue.
Well, they'd also have to address why the public service has grown by 40%. Some of it pandemic related, not all of it, which is not necessarily a great issue for them either.
If productivity is the issue, why not go back 5 days a week? Because as a taxpayer, I don't want 2 unproductive days.
Teams every day of the week. Okay.